Okay, so last week we turned the corner and we started Perek Hazov. Perek Hazov begins on, see, we got Mem, where are we here? Mem Dalid, Amid Aleph. And we learned the Mishnah, and the Mishnah was kind of a unique and interesting introduction to a different topic. So without going into too much detail, because the Gemara will start up with interesting questions, the premise of the Mishnah is that when you make a kinyan, you make a kinyan with consideration. And so what's consideration? So we say it's money, mos. It doesn't have to be, it can be an object, and the Mishnah deals with that. But basically, the question surrounds the key fact of the name of the perek is Hazov, and that's very important. For a moment, you'll see why, is that if you want to acquire gold, so the Mishnah says, Kone es hakesef, Hazov kone es hakesef, hakesef ene kone es Hazov. So the premise is that as long as you either make a kinyan or do what you have to do with the object of your quest, meaning the chayfetz, then it's sort of secondary whether or not the money has changed hands. So for instance, if you want to acquire gold and the gold goes from Reuven to Shimon, then that's already the deal. The deal is done. Yes, you have to finish the deal by Shimon has to give the money to Reuven, but if he doesn't give the money to Reuven and that gets delayed, that doesn't quash the deal. The deal is done. So that's the key factor that the Mishnah wants to tell us. It goes on to say what happens if you, but it's a little bit different if you're trading one object for another object, meaning not money, because then the first object trading hands automatically means the second one has traded hands, even if it hasn't. So the halach is slightly different. The deal is over. You no longer have a sort of dangling part of the deal because you didn't finish. In the case of money, you didn't finish because the money didn't trade hands, but the deal is done. In the case of chayfetz for chayfetz, the first chayfetz that goes from Reuven to Shimon means the second one went. It didn't go. It's still in Shimon's hands. Doesn't matter. It went because the chayfetz already transacted. So that's a little bit of a nuance to the principle, but that's the principle. That's what the Mishnah and this perek will deal with, is how we deal with the nuances of a kinyan. So for instance, in our time, although the halacha has to adapt itself, if I were to say to you, Yale, I want to sell you an object, a computer, and you're going to give me $500. So, of course, you have to have a kinyan. So you make hagbo, or mashicha, whatever it is. And when you make your kinyan, you own the computer. You didn't give me the money. Now I have to go after you for the money because you didn't give it to me yet. It doesn't undo the fact that if I don't get the money, I can't come back and say, give me back the computer. That can't happen because the kinyan that you made for the computer is complete. So that's a little bit of an anomaly in the halacha, because how do you then undo a transaction if I don't get my money? So so then now I have to pursue the money, which sounds imbalanced, because why should you get the computer and I don't get the money? I mean, it's a good question, but from a halachic standpoint, the deal has already been done. Now, of course, you have to go to Bezin. It usually shouldn't happen that way, but I'm just saying that you have to understand from the standpoint of kinyan, just from the standpoint of kinyan. We're not going to talk about the nuances of not getting the money and fighting for it or whatever. It shouldn't happen. But from the nuances of kinyan, the kinyan was made. But the key part of the Mishnah is money for money, zahav for kesef. Kesef trumps zahav. And we see further on, for the Mishnah says, for that matter, that when it comes to nechoshes, copper, that silver is the coin, the realm of, so to speak, it's the currency, and it trumps nechoshes too. Now we'll see how important that is in a minute when we learn the Gemara. Is that why is silver better than Zohar. So I don't want to spoil the preview because the Gemara is going to go in depth into that question. We didn't address that. We just said that Hazov Kones Kesef, Kesef is really the way to go. Okay, so that's the Mishnah. More or less, that's the Mishnah. Now let's start with the Gemara, and we see it's an interesting Gemara. Says the Gemara, Masnale Rebbe Rav Shimon Berei. Rebbe was learning with his son, Rav Shimon Berei, his son. So he was teaching him this Gemara. Hazov Koines HaKesef. And he said, like what the Mishnah says, Hazov Koines HaKesef. Rebbe was the Yehuda Anasi. He was Masada of the Mishnah. And by the way, his Rebbe was Reb Meir. So all of this stems from Reb Meir, who was a Tana, and who, as we'll see in the Gemara as we go on, he was the one who discussed this whole issue, and we'll see what the ramifications are. Okay, so he learned from Rebbe, his father, and he was said over to his son, Azov Keres HaKesef. Amalei, so Reb Shimon, the son, said Rebbe. He called him Rebbe because he was his Bava Metzia. So there's a whole discussion in the Gemara. What do you do? How do you address a parent who is your Rebbe Muvik? Do you call him Rab? Do you call him Abba? Or whatever, Avi. So that's an interesting discussion. Here we see. So there were Shainim who say that this is a one-off. It's an anomaly because it was Rabbi Yehuda Anasi. If it would have been anybody else, he would have called Avi. But because it was Rabbi Anasi, who was the father of the Mishnah, so he called him Rebbe. Okay, but that's on a side note. So he said, Amalei Rebbe, wait a minute. I know that when you were younger and you learned this Gemara, you said the opposite. You said HaKesef Koines Hazor. V'tachzor v'tishna lana b'zikunecha Hazor Koines HaKesef. What's going on? Well, I remember Rav Shimon, of course, was a big Talmid Chacham, and by the time he was older, he had heard much Torah from his father. He said, I remember when we first learned this, Abba or Rebbe, that you said the exact opposite. That HaKesef Koines Hazor. So what are you now saying? Now you're reverting. So my sava b'zikanecha, my sava b'aldusel. What did you think then, and what do you think now? In other words, explain. So this Gemara really sort of opens up the process and says you once said one thing, now you recanted and said something else. An Adam Gadol who's learning doesn't do that. So there must be something behind it. So please explain to me what you meant. So the Gemara says as follows: Sova dava dechoshev have tova kaspa deloy choshev have a period. In other words, now we're going to get into the root of what silver is and what gold is, and why, for instance, our Mishnah says Hazov Koines HaKesef. So what's the pshat? So he says as follows: in your youth, some of you will say, in your youth, you thought the dava, which is mean gold, the choshuv, gold is more choshuv, it's more valuable, right? So how that came about in history, it did. Gold was more valuable than silver. So therefore, in his youth, he said that the more choshuv metal should be the money that, in other words, that should be what people are looking to trade, i.e. money, not chayfetz. In other words, when you're looking to see what is the sort of the currency of the land, you look at what's most choshuv. So when he learned this, when he was younger, he says it's more choshuv. It's definitely, gold is more choshuv than silver. And kasva, silver, delo choshev havapira, silver, which is not as valuable, that was the chayfetz, that was the object, which is why he said at that time, hakesef koine es hazov, that the kesef, the chayfetz, if you trade that, it automatically triggers a kinyan on the zov, the money part, even if you didn't transact, which is what we said in the beginning, that once the chayfetz changes hands, that's the kinyan, and the money is secondary. So when he was a youth, he said, you know what? Since Zov is more choshev than Kesef, so Kesef is the chayfetz. So once I give you the Kesef, the deal is done. I didn't get the Zov, the gold. Okay, you'll get it, and that's the process. So that's the pshat in his thinking. Now, so okay, so that's what he thought, that he was young. When he was older, meaning now in our Mishnah, Savar, he thought, what? Kaspa, the Chorif, okay, Daf Mem Daled Amud Beis. What is Chorif? Says Rashi, Chorif, Yotze Behatzor V'Oivel Soicher. That as a practical matter, silver is what people use for business. True, it's more chashuv, gold is, but that's not the point. The point is, what are they more comfortable transacting in? So since it's charif, avatava, that becomes the money. So in other words, that's his thinking now that he has sort of matured and he's seen the world. The havadalo charav havapira, and the gold then becomes the chayfetz, the konale pira lativa, and therefore we say hazov koinus hakesef, because the zov transacted the object, and it konos the money. So what do we have in front of us? We have two opposites. What's more important, chashivus, value, or the facility with which people use money, which has nothing to do with chashivas. It has to do what are people more comfortable using as money. So in his youth, he said, you know what? Chashivas is important. That's what he thought. So he says, if chashivas is important, then zov has to be the money, because it's more chashuv. Therefore, it's chashuv. Fine. And therefore he said what he said, that a kesef kaina es hazov. But later on, he came to the conclusion that it's not about chashivus, it's about sort of the facility or the currency of money, and what do people use. It's like, for instance, in our time, maybe once upon a time, you could say that people used a coin as the transaction of the realm, but it became later that paper became
But I think that's true. But I think even more direct to this, you look at, I just looked it up, the history. It goes back to the very late 18th century, 1790s, when the U.S. started real official coinage, and it was both silver and gold. But very quickly, the silver became, and really until I guess the early 20th century, mid 20th century, we still had silver coins with real silver content.
Right.
And so the silver was the coin of the realm, even though we were on a gold standard.
Right. That's a very interesting.
And Rabbi, the Mishnah itself goes against the chashivas, because we also hold that copper is a chayfetz, and silver is the currency. So if it was a chashivas thing, then it would be the other way around.
Yeah, you're anticipating the Gemara, Yale. You're absolutely anticipating the kasha of the Gemara. So I commend you, because
I read ahead. I'm sorry.
Correct.
I'm sorry. I looked ahead.
That would be the question. You're absolutely correct. So just sticking to silver and gold for a moment. I don't know how it came about, and Menashe, I don't know if the history says it, but people started leaning towards silver more than gold. They could have said at the time that gold should be the coin we use, and then we would have had a different story. What's interesting is that the Gemara in Seder Yerushalmi calls this perek not hazov but a kesef. The same perek in Yerushalmi is referred to as hakesef, not hazov. We said, what's the fourth perek of Bava Metzia? Hazov. In Yerushalmi, it's hakesef, because they go by Rebbe's earlier version of what he said when he was younger, that what? That kesef koines hazov, that silver was the product, was the chayfetz. So, you sort of can't ask what people's thinking is, because if the push would have been back in the early days, as you point out, that everybody went towards gold, then we would be trading in gold, not right now. Gold is the standard, and that becomes important for our Gemara. It becomes very important that the gold standard is what we're talking about, because we aren't talking about a gold standard. But in that gold standard, it's the silver that is what is traded. In other words, we rely on the gold as the standard, but we don't use gold as the everyday monetary quantity. We use silver. Until now we use paper, but still silver. So that's the teretz. The teretz is that in his youth he looked and he said, "Oh, gold is chashuv. Gold has to be the money." But then he said, "What? Wait a minute. Why is gold the money? It has nothing to do with chashivus. It has to do with what people use on a daily basis." And on a daily basis, it turned out, as you had said, that silver became the monetary sort of quotient, and therefore he changed his mind, did Rebbe, and he said it's hazov koines kesef, because kesef is not the current, because kesef is the currency, not the chayfetz. All right, so that now explains the difference between the two points in his life when Rebbe made this. So he says the choref havativa david alor choref, because gold is a chayfetz, but kanal imperial tiva. And the pera, the chayfetz, is acquired by the money. Okay, good answer, and that's how we leave it. Now the Gemara now and down for quite a bit is going to ask the question, which is the right one, another right or not right, but which is the correct version, and the Gemara is going to try to prove that the early version in his youth is the correct one, not like our Mishnah, but like the other Mishnah, the one in Yerushalmi, which is a kesef koines hazov. That's going to be the aim of the Gemara. So now you'll understand when we ask the questions, that's what they're asking. They want to try to bring proofs, and the Gemara is going to go back and forth showing a proof and then knocking out the proof, and then do it again and again, because we want to get to the bottom. You can't have two. So there has to be one that is the correct one. And Rebbe himself says, I thought one thing and now I went to something else. But the Gemara is going to try to show that his earlier version was really the correct version. Amar Rav Ashi. So you're going to start like this. Amar Rav Ashi, Bialduse Mistabra, that in your youth, when you were younger, that's the right version, says Rav Ashi. That was really the right version, not the later version. Why? So Yale, to your point, since the Mishnah, now this didn't change from youth to later years. The rest of this Mishnah is the way we read it today. What does it say? That the copper acquires the kesef. What does that mean? That nechoshes is the chayfetz, the object. And if you transact the nechoshes, the deal is done, even if the kesef wasn't transferred. So nechoshes is the product, and kesef is the money. Okay, nechoshes is going to kesef. Now, so what's the proof that the youthful version is correct? Says the Gemara as follows: I amrit b'shloima kaspa. If you say that the first part of the Mishnah, when it says silver related relative to the gold, is considered silver is the product, like he says in his youth. The Gabidava Piryahava, in relation to the gold, it is the product. Now we understand why the Mishnah has to say that the nechoshes is the product and it's koines kesef. Why? Why, Yale? The afal pi de legabe dava piryahava, because even though with regard to gold, it is a pira. It's a product. It's a chayfet. Legabe nechoshes tiva hava, but legabe nechoshes it is money. So we need nechoshes to introduce us to the fact, because if we didn't have it, we might assume in the first version, the youthful version, that silver is the product and nechoshes is the coin, just like silver is the product and gold is the coin. You would have no reason to distinguish between, if you once you say silver is a product, it's a product to everything, to gold, to copper, to whatever you
Right.
make, right? So that would be the normal thinking. Follow the lead. The lead says that silver is a product related to gold, therefore it's a product related to nechoshes, right? Comes the Mishnah to tell us, no, you're right, legabe gold, it is a product, but legabe nechoshes, it is money. Now we understand why it has to say beferish in the Mishnah, nechoshes kones hakesef, right? But elei amrit kaspa legabe davatava. But if you say that kesef is considered gold, is considered money regarding gold, hashda legabe dava the choshev minei, since we would argue that you know why kaspa is considered money, because like in the Sefer, in other words, in the current version, the older version, when he's older, you know why? The choshev minei, because gold is more choshev. Amritava, I would say that silver is money. But in regard to copper, the choshev, the chorif, silver is not only more valuable than copper, but it's also more current. People use it more than copper. Maboya, then I wouldn't know that silver is considered money to copper, because I would have thought it's not the same as gold. So in other words, he's trying to prove that the earlier version is correct, because in the earlier version, we need nechoshes kones hakesef to distinguish that silver has a different role with vis-a-vis gold as it does vis-a-vis silver. But in the later version, our version, in our Gemara, why mention nechoshes? If you're telling me that legabe zohar, which is more choshev, silver is money, then of course legabe nechoshes, where silver is not only more choshev, but is also more of a currency than copper, of course it is the currency. So it's superfluous in our Mishnah. That's what the kasha is. So there's no reason to have it in our Mishnah, is the point. So with this, he wants to bring proof that the youthful version of Rebbe is correct. Okay, is that clear? Because in other words, from that Mishnah, it makes more sense than it does from our later Mishnah. So that's what Rav Ashi wants to say. It's a raya from the language itself that the earlier version is correct and not the later version. So that's the kasha. So Rashi says, Bialdusa mistabra, in his youth, he held the Vadai Kain Kibla Merabba Rab Meir. In other words, that's what I said earlier. So Rab Meir is the source of all this, because he was the Rebbe of he was the Rebbe for Rabbi Yonossi. The Vadai Kain Kibla Merabba Rab Meir. Certainly, Rebbe got this from Rab Meir, his Rebbe. Stam Mishnah Shalo, because Stam Mishnah is Rab Meir. Okay. Ben Asne Bahada Nachoshes Koines HaKesef, because it says Beferish Nachoshes Koines HaKesef. So you have to read it that it means that Kesef is the commodity with relation to gold. Otherwise, why do you need the Nachoshes portion? So now he says, if you say that Kesef is Koines Azov Asnaya in the Mishnah, therefore, if you say Kesef is not Koines Nechoshes, the Afagav to Legabe Dava. With regard to gold, Havapira, it is a Chayfetz product. Legabe Nechoshes, the Lo Choshev, Havatuva. It's different from the choshes because it's more, because it has not, because it's the choshes is less choshesh. So it's clear why you say that language in the Mishnah. But if you say the hazov kainas hakesef, which is our Mishnah, that zov is the product, it's not lomeli lasnuya. Why do we have to learn the choshes kainas hakesef? Which is what we just said. There would be no reason. So the fact that it says it means it's just repeating that portion of the Mishnah, but in reality, kesef is the product, and zahav, because it's more chashuv, is the currency, is the money. So that's the kasha, right? So I mean, that's if anybody has a kasha on that, but that's the kasha. So he wants to bring raya that it's the youthful version that is correct. Says the Gemara, no, you can't bring a raya that is the case. Although l'chayra it seems that you could. No, he says, you know why we say nechoshes kainas hakesef? There's another reason, and we always know in the Gemara that if you give alternative reasons for something, then you can't use the svara, the theory that you want to postulate the other way. Oh, it says it, so it must be this. You can't do that because I'm going to hang another reason why it says it. So it no longer becomes clear that your first reason is the proper reason, right? In other words, we're going to want to show, the Gemara is going to show that there's another reason why it says in this Mishnah, our Mishnah here in Azov, and the choshes kainas hakesef, which has nothing to do with the primacy of either silver or nechoshes, in which case you can't argue. What is that? What is that notion? Itzrach. I need it. Why? Sol kedata chamina. I would have thought hanipriti ba'asra the sage inhu tarifi tfei mikaspa. In places where, in other words, the world is a large place. So in places where a copper coin is the main sort of source of monetary transaction, right? Everybody uses it. Then I would say, okay, in that particular situation, you're right. Nechoshes is money, and silver is the product, the produce, the payra, right? Right? In a charifa, tfei mikaspe, because people use it. A mativa have it. Then we'll say that the copper is the tiva, meaning the money, and the silver is the chayfetz. Komash malon. That's what you would say. Komash malon. The Gemara is now saying, no, even in that situation, you won't say it. You won't give credence to the copper as the money. Given the ikaduchta the losage bay, since there are places in the world where copper is not used as the coin sort of the realm, pirahava. In other words, there are places where copper is prime as money, and there are places where it isn't. But silver, he's saying, is always prevalent. So because silver is a constant and the choshes is not a constant, we have to make one rule, and that rule is that silver is money. But you're 100% right. There are places where copper, and probably in history, Menashe, you're the historian, you can find places where copper was really the prime form of money. But since it isn't universal, says the Gemara, we don't want to say, in one place, copper is money. In another place, copper is a chayfetz. It would become too confusing. So therefore, we went to a different approach, and we said, well, silver is always there. Maybe it's not used as much as copper in some places, but it's there. So let's latch onto silver and say that silver is the coin of the realm. That's why the youthful Mishnah and the Mishnah when he was older always says the choshes kainas hakesef, even in places where the choshes is prime, kesef becomes the coin of the realm, and the choshes always becomes the copper. So that's the Gemara's teretz. We could have said, yes, in some places the choshes is prime, but then we would have a totally confusing circumstance, and we don't want that. So we revert back to saying that kesef is money, and the choshes is product, even in places where the opposite would be more prevalent. So that's what so Rashi is telling us. No, okay, so actually there is no Rashi here now. So in other words, the teretz is that we have to have the Mishnah the way it is formulated, both in the earlier version and the later version. So therefore, it's no raya. Yeah, like you wanted to point out that the Choshes Konas Akesef should be some kind of a proof that the useful version is the correct version. So it's a very interesting turn of events how the Gemara looks at it, because in fact it's conceding, Gemara is conceding that it's not that clear that Kesef is always the sort of the coin of the realm, but by default we're making it the coin everywhere, even though in some places he acknowledged that copper was really the coin that we use. So now it's very interesting because that's the answer. But when you look at the different Rishonim, there's a whole different view of this discussion between copper, and it's almost like a historical a footnote on currency, because some Rishonim say, I don't necessarily agree with this view, because copper was used for, let's say, smaller transactions, and silver was used for larger transactions. So now we're splitting hairs. Now we're saying, you know what? Depends on what your circumstance is, whether you use copper and silver. So it's not universal that silver is always money, because when people dealt with smaller things, then copper became easier to deal with because it had less of a monetary value. And sometimes you're dealing in small items. The small items, you don't want to introduce, a $50 bill when you're buying a pack of gum for 99 cents. It doesn't make sense. So they used copper for small transactions and silver for large transactions. So the Mefarshim then asked, so why do you saying that silver is always the proper currency? There are many cases where they never see silver at all because they're only dealing in small matters. So that's just give you a flavor of how this Gemara was not necessarily so clearly accepted, because others felt that there was validity to the fact that the Choshes was Kesef, because in many cases, silver just didn't cut it, let alone gold. I mean, we're not even talking about gold, we're talking about which is more choshev, but even silver, which is more choshev than the Choshes, didn't have the sort of the quote unquote the weight in the marketplace that the Choshes had. So just keep that in mind, that there's a view that says that, wait a minute, this isn't so clear that silver should really be the coin of the realm. But nevertheless, at the time of the Mishnah, when Rabbi was taking Reb Meir's thoughts, because Reb Meir was the one who originally had posed these two views, and he thought like Reb Meir one way when he was younger, and then he codified the Mishnah later, and he thought like Reb Meir in the other way. Again, it goes to show you sort of a track of how Gemara was developed, that it wasn't sort of uniform, because even at the time of the Tanoim, we know that there was machlekes among the Tanoim, and even the Amoraim, who were then commenting on the Tanoim, didn't agree. They agreed with this Tana, they didn't agree with this Tana. So the point being, the Torah was never uniform where everybody and anybody agreed to one set of theory. There was always a point of dispute. Shammai Hillel, Abaye Rava, there was always a point of dispute as to how to learn it. And that's Pshat Torah Hashem. In other words, we have a Torah, we have a concept, and now two Gedolim looking at the same concept can come up with a different view, which tells us, lahavdil, but it tells us that even when we look at things today, halacha or otherwise, the fact that two Gedolim may disagree doesn't mean one is right and one is wrong. Because Torah Hashem, we can say teku to everything, and then we just leave it aside, and we'll let Eliyahu Navi come and tell us what is the actual Torah. But for our purposes, we do have machlokes l'shem shemayim. We have a machlokes in understanding the very basic theory as we do here. What's correct? Is it Zov? Is it Kesef? Is it Kesef? Is it Nechoshes? I mean, logic tells us, and you see that at one point in time, Rebbe did one set of values, Chashivus, as the primer for what is Kesef. And then he said, wait a minute, Chashivus isn't really that important. It's what people use as currency. In other words, what do they use? So the people spoke. The people spoke. The people said it was silver, not gold. Anyway, I found it fascinating because here you have a Gemara that really sort of strips it away and gives you a sort of a clear view as to what the halacha is or how we think, and we see that it's not uniform. Okay, so now we have no proof one way or the other. Is it the youthful version of Rebbe, or is it the older version of Rebbe? So he says, "Kamash Malon, given the ikaduchta lo saga lepira, however, that since there was a place where there was no copper, so therefore it's only silver, and therefore we say silver rules the day." Okay, so no inference on what the halach is. Comes Rabbi Hyatt, and now Ba'af Rabbi Hyatt Savar, Rabbi Hyatt is now going to give us an indication of what he thinks. Again, trying to prove this is all going in the direction of trying to show that it's the youthful version, right? Kesef Kaines Azov, that is the correct, not the later version. Okay, Ba'af Rabbi Hyatt Savar, the Havatavo. And even Rabbi Hyatt holds that gold was the money part of it. Why? For the following reason. The Rav Ozev Dinra Mibasre Rabbi Hyatt. It's an unusual case, but Rav borrowed a dinner from Rabbi Hyatt's daughter. How he came to Rabbi Hyatt's daughter, I have no idea, but he came to Rabbi Hyatt's daughter and he wanted to borrow a zov, a golden coin from the daughter. The sofa yakre dinre. Now we introduce a new subject. It increased in value, and he wants to give it back. And what's the problem? Ribis, says Rashi. Azif dinre lo vezehuvin. He borrowed gold. It says Rashi also ribis. Here he's borrowing a coin. The coin went up in value. He has to give back the coin, and he's asking Rabbi Hyatt, "What do I do? Do I give your daughter back the same coin? It's now worth more, and she's getting ribis from my money." Look how careful they were in ribis. Separate matter, but that's the kasha. So, inherently in this question, what does it tell us? That Zov is money. If Zov wasn't money, what's the point of the equation here? What's the point of the question? So he wants to bring a raya from here that the youthful version of Rebbe is correct because Zov is money. Okay, so let's see how this plays out. That's the facts on the ground. The Sofa Yakredini also came to Rabbi Hyatt. So he came to Rabbi Hyatt and says, "What do I do? What do I do? Do I give her back the coin?" Omalei. So Rabbi Hyatt said, now you could say that there was nepotism here because it's his daughter, but he's Omalei. He said to Rav, "Zil Shalom Le Tovin V'Tekilin." Give her back the whole coin. In other words, don't worry about it. Just give it back to her. So the Chayra, what does this tell us? Right away, it tells us there's no ribis. Why is there no ribis? So we're going to explain in the Gemara, but I'll just tell you the preview is you can't have ribis in money. You could only have ribis in a chayfetz, in a object. In other words, the object was worth $100. Now the object is worth $110. That's ribis. But if the money was worth $100, in other words, in other coin, let's say a gold coin was worth 10 silver coins. Okay, let's just say as an example. Now it's worth 15 silver coins. So if I give you back the gold coin, you've now made a profit, so to speak, of 5 coins. The chayra, that's ribis. I'm giving you something more valuable. The Torah says there's no ribis in money, only in a chayfetz. So,
Rabbi,
yeah, go ahead.
what about pearls? Some countries trade pearls as money.
Pearls, yeah,
A pearl,
right.
that's money to some individuals. But
Right,
yet-
but I think from the standpoint of our Gemara, the coinage we've now established is silver, even though pearls like copper might be a coin in some part of the world. So I think the Gemara is now establishing, at least at the time of the Gemara, right? In the time of the Gemara,
Right.
that because the answer to the Nechoshes problem was that Nechoshes may be a coin of the realm in some places, but silver is in every place. So because silver is in every place, we prefer to say silver is the coin, not Nechoshes. That's how the Gemara answers that question. I think the same would be true of a pearl. You're right, pearl is a valuable commodity, and maybe
Or a diamond.
and maybe in some
Diamond.
it's
All right,
money.
but here's the one difference though. Whether it's whatever the coin of the realm is, or possibly multiple coins, as we've seen in different places, different times, but say typically copper, silver, gold, all of those have a huge advantage that a essentially pure or nearly pure, a particular alloy of metal, you can measure it out by weight. The coin somehow is broken in half. The two pieces together are worth as much as the original coin, or each one is worth half as much, etc. Whereas, but there's no qualitative, except for rare collectibles, there's no qualitative difference between one penny and another, between one silver dollar and another, between one gold $10 and another. And therefore there shouldn't be any ribis between it. Makes sense. But when you have things like pearls or diamonds or things, even if they're used nominally as coinage, there are qualitative differences. Your pearl is a little bit more clear and shiny or whatever it is, and same thing with certainly with diamonds. So it becomes not necessarily that one is exactly the same as the other.
It's a good point, but ask yourself underlying, because you made a premise. The premise is that one silver coin is the same as another. What happens if you have one silver coin that's totally scratched up and is mangled or whatever, and then you have a silver coin that looks pristine?
Because it doesn't
Sure.
matter. You look at places throughout time where, because particularly where minting of coins was not done as precisely as now, and things would rub off and coins would break. I mean, there's
Right.
I think they call it pieces of 8 because you could break it, etc. That in the end, a coin, when you're on a silver standard, gold standard, etc., a coin comes down to the weight of the base metal that's in it. And so if it's a little scratched or whatever, as long as it's still a half an ounce or whatever it is, that's the value, period. And the appearance doesn't really matter in any substantive way.
How did we reach that? You're 100% right, but how did we reach that? That was the habit. In other words, how did it didn't fall from the sky that a mangled silver dollar is, regardless, because it's the same weight as a beautiful silver dollar, has the same value. That became through practice, through
I think it's the opposite. It's today's modern world, last couple hundred years, where we think of, wow, shiny new coin. You look at the coins they found in ancient Israel and ancient Greece and so on. They're misshapen. They're this, they're that.
right.
And that's not just because they've been sitting in the ground for thousands of years. That's just the quality of the minting at the time.
Right.
And so it really comes down to weight.
Right.
But years ago, they used to do a silver coin with pure silver, or
Or
no, it's gonna be
98% or whatever it was. Yeah.
exactly.
We're
Now,
talking
if
the time
you
of the
take
Gemara. The time of the Gemara. That's what it was. Yeah.
Right. At
Yeah,
time of
but
the Gemara,
here
but up
you
to
have a silver
100 years
dollar.
ago here.
Yeah, but a silver dollar here, well, now it's nothing, but it was what, 50% bronze or something, and then they covered it with silver. So
Right.
you didn't really have
But
the
and the same thing with when I was looking up the history, or where I put a note in the chat there with copper actually, where they used the copper standard in Sweden for a
under
while when
silver, yeah,
and then they switched.
Right.
In the U.S., when they started with copper and silver coins, eventually they switched really to basically silver until they went to just alloys of everything and no real value, because the copper they had to devalue because the copper was getting too expensive, so that you couldn't put enough copper in the coin to. I mean, it's a problem now. People want to melt down their pennies, so it's things do change somewhat over time with that.
Right. So to your point, David, and Menashe is saying that pearls, diamonds, all these other valuable commodities, even though they might have used a pearl as the coin of the realm, say in some place, but it's still objectively is a chayfetz. It's as you say, a pure pearl is worth more than a pearl that's scratched, or what is it? An A diamond, a B diamond is worth more than a D diamond. In other words, so you have these variances that take it out of the realm of kesef, because if it was real money, it shouldn't matter whether it's a D or an A. It's the same thing. But the Torah says it's not.
yeah,
So
but the whole thing really stems down to the fact that a brass coin is going to be less worth less than a silver coin. A silver coin is going to be have a lesser value than the gold coin. And then, of course, when you get into such large numbers, and if you want to carry around $100,000 in a briefcase, you can't carry that in gold. So what do? You get yourself a diamond. That was what happened years ago when they had to flee the country. People converted everything into diamonds because you could swallow a diamond. It's going to be worth whatever money that you have. So they've always gone
Right,
to
but it wasn't literally $100,000 diamond. It was a diamond that today was worth $100,000. When you get to sell it, maybe it'll be worth 75, maybe it'll be worth 125.
That's correct, but they always had a standard for diamonds or for whatever, because they always wanted to see what the floors are, if it was pure, if it was clear, it was the faucets, whatever the terminologies they use in genealogy, whatever it is for stones. But you see that there's a value in just about anything.
yeah,
And there should be rivers in that as well.
yeah. But again, when you cut to the chase, and you're asking yourself, okay, is a chayfetz like a pearl, like a diamond, like any other precious metal? The Gemara is saying basically that it's the universality of the use of that item that makes it money versus a chayfetz. So having concluded that in the case of Nechoshes has its places where it's absolutely a money, but overall silver is treated as money more than Nechoshes, and to have one standard, we go with Nechoshes. Clearly Nechoshes probably was used more than maybe pearls or diamonds or other things. Look, it's clear that in some cases diamond is money, because among diamond dealers or among people who handle diamonds, they are trading diamonds for diamonds and treating it like money, clearly. But that's a minority. And what the Gemara is saying is we have to look at the universality of a coin, and silver, by and large, has a more universal appeal than either gold or Nechoshes or other metals. So in our case here in the Gemara, we don't even the Gemara, this Mishnah only introduced Kesef, Zov, and Nechoshes, even though there are many other forms of theoretically objects that can be used as money, because they were even less popular as money than even Nechoshes. So we don't bother mentioning them. So your mentioning them is correct, maybe in I don't know, India, let's say, for instance, but not in the rest of the world, or maybe in some other country. Pearls
Pearls.
caught people's fancy, and they liked pearl as the way to trade. Or I mean, the Indians didn't have money, so what did they do? I mean, they traded trinkets and other things, which is chayfetz b'chayfetz. That's what the Mishnah also talks about, chayfetz b'chayfetz. That if you trade one chayfetz for another, as people did, that's money. But it's treated differently. We treat chayfetz b'chayfetz differently than we treat zov and kesef, which in our parlance is money. You see, it's very interesting. It's the nuance of the language that makes this whole Mishnah and discussion valid, is because why isn't any two things a chayfetz? If I trade you a chayfetz, a laptop for a sofa, that's a valid transaction. But neither of them are considered money, because they didn't grow up as being money. The whole concept of money is something that was makabel by the people, that there is a standard for trading anything in the world for one item. So we're not always trading a sofa for a laptop. We're trading a sofa for something else, something that we call money. So that the whole discussion of the Mishnah is, what is that money? What is that one thing that you could trade anything for? Otherwise, if I have a laptop and I need a sofa, why do I want money? I want a sofa. I need a sofa. So again, in the barter economy, that's what happens. But in the real world, it arose. Obviously, this was how it arose, is that there is something that is universal to everybody, that everybody will trade a laptop for, even if they need a sofa. So they'll trade it for a coin, and you'll go and buy a sofa for the coin. So that's how, I'm assuming that's how this whole idea of money came into being, is that people became innovative and said that we need for people to be able to do mekach or memker. They have to have some form of trading, and that's how it came about. So, but nevertheless, now that we have such a coin that is universal to the world, what is that coin? Is it a gold coin? Is it a silver coin? Is it a copper coin? And that's what this whole discussion is about. And that's why Rav said, I thought it was a gold coin. I really did. Because what's more choshev than gold? I came to realize later that gold is very choshev, but it was silver that people became more comfortable dealing with. How it came about, I'm not sure I can answer, but it was silver, maybe because it was more prevalent than gold, and people said there's more silver being mined, and therefore it's easier to deal with silver. But nevertheless, silver became that chayfetz. So now Rabbi Hyatt is wanting to tell us, very interestingly, that since in this particular case, Rav borrowed a gold coin from Rabbi Hyatt's daughter, and he wanted to repay it, and it became worth more, he was afraid that he had ribbis. So now ribbis is driving the equation. Says the Gemara, the Torah never contemplated that there would be ribbis on money, only on chayfetz. That's a Torah matter, and we'll see that in a minute from where it comes. It comes from a pasuk in the Torah, that where the pasuk says, and the Mishnah later talks about it, is saw b'saw, that if you trade one saw, a measure, for another saw, then you can have ribbis. If the saw later becomes more valuable and you're returning the saw, then it's ribbis. But that leaves money out of the equation. If I trade money and I give you back a coin that's now worth more, it's not ribbis, because it's money and not a saw. In other words, a saw is a literal translation of a chayfetz.
I think the key is that everything ends up getting valued in the end in terms of money. And when you are on a gold standard, silver standard, etc., the value on the coin is by definition the value. It says $10 on that coin.
Never changes.
That is the very definition of $10. When $10 buys you more stuff or less stuff at the store, is irrelevant. It's still inherently $10.
Right. So if he had, again, for our purposes, and we'll just conclude this Gemara in a minute. If he had borrowed not a coin, but let's say he borrowed a bushel of corn.
Right, which at the time was worth exactly $10.
Right. Now that bushel of corn is worth $15. There you have an inyan of ribbis. There you have to wind up giving back less corn than you borrowed in order to make it equal to what you borrowed, because otherwise it looks like ribbis. That is the stark contrast between a chayfetz, corn, and a coin. So now listen to this Gemara. This is a very interesting Gemara. Pay her the whole amount, don't worry. Says the Gemara, if you say that gold coin was the coin, the actual coin, Shapir, then he said correctly, because there's no ribbis on a coin, right? Shapir. But if you say that the gold coin was a chayfetz, peiris, saw b'saw, then it becomes saw b'saw, which is what I just said, is the measure for ribbis, and it becomes aser, because you can't give back more than you got. Otherwise, it's ribbis. And we'll talk about ribbis in a minute. It's not the subject of our discussion, but we'll actually address that in a minute. So now, so says Rashi. Also, the comment of Rabbi Hyatt choshish mishum ribbis. Amrit b'shlomo dahava tava ve'ein hayoker v'azol toli bohen. And the up and down, the increase and decrease in value is not dependent on the coin. Ela hazul toli b'maos the mos hakesef hein shehuzul lihinosan harbe bedina v'zeh matbea halove v'matei yikabel. Just like we just said, you got a coin, you returned a coin. Value aside, it still says $10 on the coin, right? That's exactly the point. Havale saw besaw, it becomes the concept of saw besaw, shehuka v'huzul toli b'peiros, v'oser, and it's forbidden. Why? It's not a comment, because later, in this parak, actually later, at the very end of the parak, a person cannot say to his friend, lend me a kur, which is a measure of wheat, and I will give you from the threshing floor. Shema yukru, because maybe from the threshing floor it became more valuable. Ribis. And that had to do with the chayfetz, had to do with an object. So what do we see from here? We see from here that that it's clear from this incident that the useful version of the Mishnah is correct. That it's all about, as I say, the Benjamins, it's all about the gold. It's all about the gold. Gold is a coin, therefore it's not ribbis. Silver or anything else would be ribbis, because it's a chayfetz. So you have, according to this version, you have proof positive that it is the youthful version of Rebbe. Okay? If we stopped here, that would be the answer. But we're not stopping here. We're going to finish this Gemara. And the Gemara is going to say, don't rush into this. So, as the Gemara says, Rav Dinrei Have. Okay, middle of the line. When Rav came to the daughter of Rabbi Hyatt to borrow a gold coin, he already had a gold coin in his pocket. Listen to this. This is a fascinating thought. Rav Dinra Havale. He already had a dinner. He didn't need to borrow the dinner because he didn't have a dinner. The kivan the Havale Dinra Nasek Omalo. He needed to get access and he didn't have access. That's what happened here. He had a dinner. He couldn't get access. He went to the daughter of Rabbi Hyatt and says, could you lend me a dinner because I can't get a hold of my dinner? And as soon as I get my dinner, I'll give it back to you. So what does the Gemara say? Rav Dinra Havale, given the Havla Dinra, and since he had it, Nasa Ka'omo, it's as if he said to the daughter of Rabbi Hyatt, Halveni, lend me your dinner at Yava Beni, O at Emcha Mafteach. Just lend me the dinner until I find the key to my strong box, and I can get a hold of it because I need it now and I can't get it. So now that changes the picture entirely, because he is not borrowing a dinner, and therefore it's a raya that a coin doesn't increase in value. A coin does perhaps increase in value, no raya. But the reason why you can't bring a raya from here is because the minute he asked her for the dinner, and we'll see Rashi in a minute, it's as if he gave her back the dinner that he has in his strongbox. And if that dinner increased in value, it's her dinner, not his dinner. You hear the chap? In other words, if you're lending me the dinner, and I'm giving back to you another dinner. You can't get a hold of it now. Okay, I get it. But it's your dinner, and it's in the safe deposit box. Now, the next thing we know, a couple of days later, the dinner is worth twice as much as it was before. And you're going to argue, but that's ribis. No, it's not, because that dinner increased in value. It already belonged to the daughter of Rabbi Hyatt. It belonged to her the minute he said, give me a dinner, and your dinner is in the box. And as soon as I get the key, I'll give it back to you. So he's already telling her that her dinner is right here. So when he gives her back the actual dinner from the box, he's giving her a dinner that she owned the moment he borrowed a dinner from her, and the increase in value is already baked in. You hear the chap? I mean, it's tremendous chap, is that, so in other words, this is not a proof, although remember, in real life, money is not ribis. It's not. Okay, we'll talk about it. But as a point of fact, you wanted to show that it has to be money, because if it was a chayfetz, it would be ribis. No, it's not ribis. It can be a chayfetz, but it's not ribis because the daughter of Chia owned it from the beginning, and any increase in value was hers. It was never transferred as ribis. It was never transferred as a more valuable coin than she gave him, because it was the coin that she got the minute she gave him the coin. So that's a real chap. Says Rashi, Dinra Havale, Kishalova es Elu, when she lent Rav the dinner, his dinner was already hers. The Gabe Sor Tanan, Aval Omalo Halveni at Shiyova Beni, or at Emta Mafteach, but since he said, just wait for me to get the key, or my son will bring the coin. Shiur should be Yodo Nikden Lamalve Ubershuso Hukro. So it's as if the coin is already in the hands of the Malve. Who's the Malve? The daughter. Ubershuso Hukro, and in the Bershus of the Malve, it increased the value. The ribis sobasod rabbanon, b'chi hai gavna lo gazar. So again, no proof. Why no proof? Because the only proof that you said is it's got to be money, because the halacha is that money doesn't make ribis. Okay, I understand that, but our case doesn't even depend on that, because in our case, you could really say that it was a chayfetz. That's all is not money. It's a chayfetz, like our Mishnah here, the later Mishnah. How does that happen? It's ribis. If it's a chayfetz, it's ribis. No, he gave her the chayfetz the very minute he borrowed the dinner. So when it increased in value, it was her benefit, not his benefit, which he's transferring back to her, and it's ribis. It's her benefit. And if it's her benefit, there's no ribis. So that's the catch. It really Zov is a chayfetz, and she's not getting ribis because she owns it from the very minute when she lent him the other coin, and therefore, because of its value, it's her money, right? I mean, it's a tremendous chap, is that the Gemara is telling us here that you can't bring proof from Rabbi Hyatt's case, because in Rabbi Hyatt's case, he actually gave her the coin at the very beginning, and even if it's a chayfetz, even if it's an object which is prone to ribis, the increase in value belongs to her, not him. Therefore, he's not giving her a bushel worth more corn. Because the corn was already hers before the increase in value. I mean, that's how you have to look at it. So this is the tremendous chap. And again, we'll stop here, but the Gemara is really desperately trying to find a way to prove that Rav's earlier version was the correct version. And we've tried twice already, and twice we have found distinguishing factors which kind of slug it up. It sort of cancels out and says, no, you can't bring a raya from here for another reason. And here, the reason is because even if it was a chayfetz, the increase in value belonged to her, not to him. All right.